One of the jobs today is to get our garden ready for spring, and I'm tackling the sedum autumn joy that run either side of our driveway. There's probably 800 odd plants, and they've all come from cuttings, which is really cool. The reason I love sedum, one of the reasons is they're really hardy, but also during summer you can just take one of these cuttings when they're green, so late spring, early summer, take the leaves off half of them, put them in the ground, and they're going to take and send out roots. So they're really fantastic from that perspective. And now's the time just to deadhead them. So you can do this a range of ways. I like to, I've tried brush cutting them, so just taking them out and then trying to use the rake in between the plants to get rid of all the brown, but that's a bit messy. So what I do is I have my secateurs, and if something doesn't come out by hand, so I can rip those away. If it doesn't come out by hand, then I'll use the secateurs. And the other thing, now that I've thrown them there, the other thing that I've tried this year is to use the leftover stems around the base of the privet that I have running up the driveway. So you can see this is looking pretty shabby, and I think part of the reason for this is we've got these Manchurian pears above, and in the initial stages this grew quite quickly, but as they've been overshadowed by the Manchurians, they've got quite leggy. And so the idea this year, which is going to be a huge job, is to cut back the Manchurian pears. So I'll cover that off in the next episode. But what I'm doing here is I'm taking out the deadheads and then just placing them around the base. And the idea there is I'll then fill them or cover them with mulch at a later date, and this will break down, and it should actually be quite good for the privet and should help them along and help them to look a little bit fuller. Another thing that you can do at this time of year is, I'll get my spade in a minute, but you can dig these out and divide them up really easily. So you can see a clump like this. With a spade, you can be really rough and you can just cut straight through it. So if you have a look a little bit closer, you can just send the spade straight through there. Either dig it up or just cut half out and then just dig another hole and drop it in. So I'll do that later on, but that's another way of propagating these. And then the final way, which is really cool, that you see these plants propagate themselves or spread themselves out through the garden. I'm just looking for a good example, is that when these branches get too heavy, and often if they're in shade or they get too much water, the branches will lay flat along the ground. And I'll just try and find a good example. But often what happens, here's a good example over here. So if you come and have a look at this one you can see where the branches are sort of, I've cut here, but the branches were heading out this way. Hatex. And what you can see here, if I lift these up, here's a good example. This is another good example of where they're laying on the ground, and the stem. Good work, Tex. That's awesome, buddy. I'm glad I got 800 of these things, because you've ruined one. But basically, as that lays on the ground, they'll then send out roots, sort of like layering. If you could just move there, big guy, because I want to sort of show this. This group here have popped up because of the layering of these plants. So I might move away, then Tex is less likely to destroy more of them. But it takes a fair bit of time working through all of these. In amongst these is a few weeds, and so I also, oxalis is the big one through here. So I use a product called Slasher, which is an organic spray, and it really tackles oxalis nicely. Within 30-40 minutes they're browned off, and if you tackle them a little bit earlier than now, maybe a few weeks ago, I did a round or two, and you can actually spray the whole bush, because the oxalis comes up before the sedum new shoots, and so you end up drowning out all of the oxalis. It dies away, and then the sedum come up in amongst the plant. So it's a really good organic spray. I think you can also use vinegar, and then understand, I think it's vinegar with salt, is another alternative, but you water it down and then put that on the weeds. I have used the vinegar and that works well. I tend not to use salt because I just don't want to have more salt going into any salt going into the soil. The really cool thing about our water here is that we have a bore and the salt levels are really low, which is fantastic. So I know there's other bores up here in the Adelaide Hills where you get a lot of salt, and you really need to manage the types of plants that you put in your garden. I think Sophie Thompson's place over in Mount Barker, she did an amazing job with her place of just making sure she had plants that could cope well with the amount of salt that came from her bore, and I think it limited the amount of the water she was able to use. But yeah, she navigated it with a really clever use of plants that would survive or thrive even with higher salt levels. So you can see it's just a slow slog. I'm going to work my way through here, and then what I've got down the bottom is some mulch, and I'll go back over, and I probably won't cover every bit of the driveway, but I'll give the pears a bit of a feed, scatter some pelletized chicken manure across them, and then get as much mulch as I can down. I usually go for our local tip, do all the pickup of green waste, and at certain times of the year you can get free loads of mulch, but usually it's sort of $15 for a trailer load, which is really good going. So I usually try and get that at this time of year just to get a nice layer down, but trailers don't, with this size garden, even don't go that far. I kind of need to have, 10-ton truck drop off mulch. So the idea with the Manchurian pears above is that they are a fantastic tree in that they're really hardy and they grow really quickly. But the challenge that we've had is that we get huge winds through this part of the garden, and because these get quite tall and because they grow out laterally, they're prone to splitting. And I've had so much damage up the driveway, and each year there's usually one or two that I completely lose. And I'll give you a good example. This is one here. So you can see on this side of the tree it's all been sort of damaged and ripped, and you can see where the branch got snapped off on that side. And so what I'm going to try and do is cut back most of the trees to sort of about this height. Sorry, not cut them down to this height, but probably from here to another 1.5 meters, and then chop them so they'll look, I guess, pollarded a little bit, and but they should be a lot more sturdy so that if winds come through and knock them about, I might lose some growth from 1.5 meters above where I am now, not around the trunk, which is my big concern. You can see this one is another good example of the damage. This one has been damaged below where I would have liked. Happy to have it happen above, but you can see the split, and we had these huge branches here which were really tall and then carried a lot of weight, and so we lost it. And as a result of losing it here, it doesn't actually look that nice. It doesn't look tidy. We're gonna stick with it, but I'm gonna get on the front foot and take down a lot of the big branches and drop the height of it. So we'll still have this avenue look up the driveway, but it's gonna be a little bit more controlled, and hopefully I reduce the chances of any more splitting.